Good. So tonight we have two speakers. One of the speakers unfortunately had to back out tonight, but both Karisa and Ashton will be able to carry on very well for us. Karisa is a community empowerment organizer for Dutchtown, South Community Corporation, and Ashton is a grassroots organizer for the Sierra Club, Missouri chapter. We welcome you, Ashton and Karisa, and thank you for speaking with us this evening. I ask if you have questions as we go along to please put your questions in the chat box. And then at the end, or when appropriate, I will give the questions to our two speakers to answer. Let's see. I think everybody who probably is going to be here is here. So I'm going to turn it over to Ashton and Karisa to give their presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sister Cheryl, for that introduction and for having us tonight. We really appreciate it. Karisa, one thing we did not discuss is who is sharing the slideshow. Would you want me to do it? Would you want to do it?
Can you do it?
I can do it.
Okay.
Give me 1 second, folks. I need to share.
While Ashton gets that started, whenever I speak about environmental justice, I like to start with a truth. And that is environmental justice is racial justice. And so I would like us all to just take a moment. You can stay on mute, but if we all just want to say that together. So on the count of 3, we'll say environmental justice is racial justice. 1, 2, 3. Environmental justice is racial justice. Awesome. Thank you so much for that.
All right. I want to check. My screen doesn't look like yours. Can you see the slideshow?
I can.
Are we seeing anything else on my screen?
Oh, yes. I'm seeing your browser. So it's not in presentation mode.
Pause. It's not in presentation mode. Hold on one moment. Sorry, folks. Okay, share this.
Matches. Oh, sorry. This is Matches. She's used to having all of my attention at this point in the evening. No.
All right, now are we seeing it?
It's still what it was, but if it works for others, I'm fine with it. Does everybody see the screen all right?
I'm seeing it all right.
Okay, great.
Can y'all see my individual notes?
No.
Well, then that's all that matters to me personally. All right, if you see the pink bar at the very top, I'm okay with that.
Perfect. Awesome.
Okay. Sorry, folks. All right. Is this the first slide?
It sure is.
All right.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at a run of show. Yeah, so again, the common understanding. So environmental racism is the disproportionate impact of environmental hazards on people of color. And so, you know, the history of environmental justice is a history of racial justice in this country, and the harm created by environmental inequities is really felt by people of color, especially in St. Louis by our Black population.
Right on. This was a very prevalent and obvious issue here in the St. Louis region. So the 4 organizations on the screen Action St. Louis, Arch City Defenders, Dutchtown South Community Corporation, and the Sierra Club came together to study and work with Washington University to really track the expansiveness and the extensiveness of environmental risk in St. Louis. But we want to introduce a little bit more about the organizations who helped do or complete some of the field work and really were the backbones of putting this work together. So with that, am I doing this, Karisa, or is this?
Sure, you can do
Oh my
action.
heavens. You gotta be kidding.
I'm sorry, if you can mute yourself, please. So we are working with Action St. who unfortunately couldn't be here this evening, but they're an organization that is working to build Black power in St. Louis City. They were founded by Caleb Reed and works to build racial justice through organizing, communications, advocacy, and direct action.
Arch City Defenders is, as they say, a holistic advocacy organization that employs many lawyers that do work to combat the inequities within our civic system, our judicial system. And so they will represent protesters, they help with evictions, they but rather than just like helping a person within just what they're doing when it comes to whatever brought them into a law space, they also ensure that that person has the all the care that they need. So if they need help finding housing, they help them find housing. If they need help getting into steady employment, or they just need new clothes and things like that. So they really are looking at all of their clients as complete people with many needs, not just a legal issue. Dutchtown South Community Corporation, we are a community development corporation. We are celebrating 49 years this year, and we do community vitality work over on the south side. We represent about 10% of St. Louis, which is Dutchtown, Gravois Park, Marine Villa, and Mount Pleasant. And we do work through community engagement and empowerment, which is a lot of what my work is, as well as housing work. And that is within tenant rights, as well as doing actual housing development and such.
And I am with the Missouri chapter of the Sierra Club. The Sierra Club is the longest and oldest Sierra or grassroots environmental organization in the country. Here in Missouri, we represent 13,000 Missourians who work to promote clean energy, safeguard the health of our communities, protect wildlife, and preserve our remaining wild places. I know we have a Sierra Club member on here, Louise Bullock, nice to see ya. But this is some of the folks who put together this report. I want to especially highlight my mentor and coworker, Leah Clyburn, for really bringing a lot of this together in large connection with many community partners. But with that, we're going to go into what exactly is the environmental racism report and what we were measuring. Like I mentioned earlier, this report was prepared by the Interdisciplinary Environmental Law Clinic at Washington University School of Law. Say that 5 times fast. Anyone, I dare you. We partnered up with them to assist our organizations in educating the St. Louis community about environmental injustices that were disproportionately endangering public health for people of color, income individuals across the St. Louis area. And we were doing this in hopes to advocate for systemic change and to remedy the injustices to then enhance public health. Prior to the report, our organizations have been organizing around environmental and housing and tenant issues for various years, and knew from our own experiences and from the experiences of our neighbors that so many of the issues that were largely negatively impacting Black St. Louisans at a much higher rate than white St. Louisans. And if you're from St. Louis, this might not be surprising given our overall somewhat pretty racist history. Just downtown, the old courthouse is known for the Dred Scott case, in which the US Supreme Court ruled that descendants of slaves were not citizens and have no rights under the Constitution and cannot use the courts to sue for their freedom. Looking forward to more recent history, the city of St. Louis has long used its planning and zoning powers, not only to enforce racial segregation, but also to confine Black St. Louisans to areas with greater environmental health risk, including industrial areas with polluting facilities. So leaders and organizers in our organizations and community came together to have deep conversation with our neighbors impacted by the various environmental racism in their parts of the city. We took what they told us and worked with our partners at Washington University to turn these stories into data that we can then map out by issue. By listening and learning from our community and our community members most impacted by compounding crises, we were able to create this report, and you can read more of their stories within the report at environmentalracism.stl.org. But this is why Karisa said environmental justice is racial justice. Our Black communities in St. Louis, just like thousands of racial and ethnic minority communities across the country, have been deemed by those with power as disposable. My colleague, who's the director of organizational transformation at the Sierra Club, his name is Hop Hopkins, put it very eloquently in a recent blog post, and I say this quote with me every time I do this presentation. But we know our neighbors are priceless and not disposable, but we know that Black Lives Matter and that we can uplift one another to make changes we want to see. But although COVID has derailed a little bit of our campaign, we're looking forward to discussing with you more today our plan of action towards building community power and addressing environmental and housing issues in the city. But with that in mind, I'm going to take us into the first issue impacting our Black neighbors. And excuse me right now for talking a lot in a row. Oh, I'm sorry. And this is my quote. I forgot to do the next slide. This is the quote by my colleague that I like to center when carrying this conversation. And that quote is, "You can't have climate change without sacrifice zones, and you can't have sacrifice zones without disposable people, and you cannot have disposable people without racism." And I will provide the link to that blog post to share later also. But with that, we're gonna go into, is this still the first slide? Oh, part of the first part.
I can explain that because I was the one who
Right on.
first made this one.
Thank you.
Yeah, apologies. When things changed last second, Ashton and I were down for the ride, but we're definitely on a bumpier road than usual. Yeah, so one thing that what you see within the report, and I always call this, it's shocking but not surprising. What we have here are two maps that show where the majority of Black people live in St. Louis, or areas where the majority of the people who live there are Black. Those areas are represented by small Black dots. Then you can see impacts of different environmental issues. So on the left, we have childhood lead poisoning, and on the right, we have vacant buildings or lots. Those are just almost exactly superimposed maps on top of each other. You can see that the lead poisoning is happening in the same areas as the vacancies, and you can see that both are happening in the same areas where there is a majority of Black residents. One thing I will point out is that you can clearly see, especially within the vacant map, where the Del Mar line is. You see Forest Park, and right along there in that white space, above it is North St. Louis, and below it is South St. Louis. And so these are the areas that we have chosen to prioritize, the areas where these issues are less. The city and our state and our neighbors have consistently chosen to prioritize over the other areas. And that's been a centuries long story. And so these are not everything we're going to talk about today. There's nothing here that is a quick fix, a single fix, or anything like that. But that doesn't mean that we can't make meaningful and impactful changes starting tomorrow.
Absolutely, Karisa. Thank you. With that, we're going to move into the 8 or 9 portions of the environmental racism report and what we've been doing around that. I'm personally going to be presenting on air quality and asthma right now. I am very passionate about this as someone who lives with asthma and did my senior research on air quality disparities in St. Louis. So this is right up my alley. I'm really passionate about it. But Black St. Louisans here in Missouri are disproportionately affected by air pollution compared to their white counterparts. And this is very discouraging when we know that St. Louis as a whole has consistently registering failing grades of ozone. And why is Missouri having failing grades of ozone? Let's look at where the pollutants are, which are these blue dots on the screen. Uncoincidentally, if you live in a Black majority neighborhood, you're much more likely to live near polluters, highways, and building demolitions which stir harmful particulate matter into the air. This helps explain why members of the Black community here in St. Louis are more likely to suffer from conditions exacerbated by pollution such as lung disease, hypertension, stroke, and asthma. One of the biggest polluters in the St. Louis area and Missouri as a whole, Ameren has one of the largest coal power plants in the country. And in fact, there are 4 coal power plants lining the St. Louis area that are emitting toxic coal pollution both into the air and into the water. Recently, Ameren has even been found to be found by the United States Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, and the Department of Justice. They actually had to bring a lawsuit against Ameren for failing to follow air quality standards to the point that our own local elected officials and body boards and commissions have failed to hold them accountable. And as a St. Louisan living with asthma, I know I personally have to be careful about the amount of times I can go outside, especially during the summer, due to poor air quality. But however, I know when talking with my community members and looking at the statistics of Black St. Louisans, particularly in areas compounding with other environmental injustices and pollutants, folks who are Black St. Louisans are 10 times more likely to suffer from asthma than their white counterparts. And that really stuck with me, that for every white kid that may go to the emergency room for an asthma attack, which is an awful experience. You don't want anyone to happen. But for every one white child in St. Louis that has an asthma attack, 10 Black children have asthma attack that have to go to the hospital, which is a very staggering statistic in my mind. In the greater St. Louis metro area, in particularly along the Riverside communities, these blue dots over here, those folks in those areas are being sacrificed in the context of my coworker's speech, that they're being sacrificed, their health is being sacrificed in order for utilities and other corporate interests to be able to maximize their own profits at the expense of our neighbors' health. And we can address these forms of environmental racism by working together, like working with our friends across the river, like in this picture right here, just last summer, to have a bi-state coalition of folks standing for clean air. We had about 150 people there and walked across McKinley Bridge with this wonderful banner. And we can do this and rally behind a cause, like a cause in St. Louis City to fix 29 of our air monitors. Only 2 of our 29 air monitors in St. Louis City are actually functioning. And those 29 air monitors are not enough to be able to accurately track the pollutants in our air, to be able to trace them back to hold polluters accountable. We need to be able to continue to build this power to hold landlords accountable for poor housing conditions that are also leading to children to develop asthma from their housing conditions as well. But from the air we breathe to the land we're standing on, we all deserve clean and safe environments, right? So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Karisa to talk about various land pollution her and her South City residents are organizing around.
Thank you, Ashton.
Oh, and this is, sorry, I'm with talking, I'm forgetting to click the slides. Here, that statistic I mentioned with 1 to 10 white to Black kids going to the emergency room.
Thank you. So I consider vacancies, and the next thing I'm going to talk about is illegal dumping, but those are really the 2 flagship issues that that Dutchtown South handles. And so I really could talk about this all night, but I won't put any of us through that. St. Louis has one of the worst vacant property problems in the US, and it's what's called hyper vacancy, meaning over 40% of our census tracts have more than 10% vacant properties. These include plots with a structure or an empty piece of land, and then more than 90% of those vacancies are majority Black neighborhoods. If in this map, you'll see the red dots represent vacancies in St. Louis. It's clear which portions of the city the land is deemed too valuable to go empty. Again, you can see where the central west end is. You can see where the far south is. And then you can see all the areas that the land has been deemed okay to let go to seed, if you will. While a sizable amount of vacancies in St. Louis are owned by the city and sit in the Land Revitalization Authority, or LRA, many are owned by private individuals and companies. One thing I will say about the LRA is that their primary mission is to get these properties back into tax revenue. And so they will allow them to sit until they have a situation where they will be producing taxes again. And a lot of the individuals who do own these properties, they do not live here in St. Louis. We have a lot of people who are from California and New York, and they purchase, they do land speculations within St. Louis because our land is so inexpensive. And I will say our land has been inexpensive for quite some time. And right now, some of that land is going up for sale because the housing prices have gone up some, but it certainly is not at the levels to reduce the amount of vacancies that we need to be, we need them to be reduced by. These vacancies are happening for a variety of ways and reasons, and a lot of them are deliberate decisions. Some of the houses, like I said, are land speculation, significant issues in the property, and the people are walking away. That's one of the stories I hear, unfortunately, pretty often within my job, is that something will go wrong with the house. People do not have funds to fix that item, and the city does not have funding to help them. There's currently a 5-year waiting list to get on the 5-year waiting list to get funding from the city to address issues, and it's only available for the elderly and the disabled. So a family who ran into a rough time would not be able to access those funds. Significant, and then there's long-term planning that has, or they have long-term planning that they have not been able to do yet. One of the things we also hear quite a bit from developers is like a funding source might have fallen through, or especially now, like labor or lumber prices and such, and they're like, you know, things are going to take slower. We have issues and whatnot. So some of it is being addressed that way. There's also an issue where a lot of times families do not plan for what will happen with the land after their passing. And so it goes into probate and it sits empty. And the longer it's empty, the more issues that happen within the property, and the more likely that even if there is a clear transfer of title eventually, the property will not be of value to that person because it's already maintained significant damage. So they wouldn't be able to easily turn it into a space that is usable. All of this is how vacancies kind of lead into a cycle of issues for communities. Ashton, this is where you're going to be clicking a bit. So first of all, these structures become unsafe and unstable. Vacancies act as a beacon. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Vacancies act as a beacon to illegal dumpers. Between the unstable structures and illegal dumping, there is an increase in pollutants in the area. Think of all the things that are found in St. Louis houses: lead paint and water pipes, mold, asbestos. This is getting into our air, soil, and waterways. All this leads to decreases in property values, which leads to more vacancies, which continues this cycle. And all of this is going to point us towards, like I said, the illegal dumping, which is what I'll move on to speaking about next. So I want you all to meet Donna the elephant. She lives at the St. Louis Zoo. And I recently read an article. Donna is 50, as is 2 of her sisters. And she is like she's considered like the aunt of the zoo. Like she's like the auntie of all the elephants. So I was very excited for Donna. So I want you all to just kind of picture if 5,000 Donnas just started walking around St. Louis, or I'm sorry, 5,000 Donnas just walking around St. Louis for an entire year. Maybe one Donna will show up one day. Maybe there'll be 3 outside. Who knows how long it'll take for the zoo to come collect all these Donnas. What happens to Donna after they collect all these Donnas. And then on top of that, think about all the waste that a elephant produces. Think about the fact that, there's, what happens, elephants create waste, and then rain happens. And then all of that waste goes into our water system or into our soil. That's what's been happening with illegal dumping in St. Louis. There's equivalent of 5,000 Donnas dumped on our streets and alleyways in 2017. Let's compare that to the amount of Donnas that were taken to the dump. So let's say somebody was like cleaning out their basement and they found a Donna in there and they were like, oh gosh, there's an elephant. I'm going to take it directly to the zoo. That only happened with 2,000 elephants in 2017. So it kind of gives you the equivalency. Now, for those of you who do not know the tonnage of elephants and can translate that off the top of your heads, it is the equivalent of 22,000 tons of trash dumped on St. Louis. I can think of very few more disrespectful things to happen than to have trash dumped on a space. I got very emotionally upset the other morning when I found a 6-pack of empty Coronas on my lawn that I suppose somebody was walking by and just dropped. And I was like, I know they didn't mean it personally, but I felt that emotional response. That's what we're doing every day. We're allowing to happen every day. When you look at where this is happening, it's happening in areas where there's less people. One of the things I always say is that people make us safe. The more people are around me, the more safe I feel. And so we have blocks in the city. We have entire neighborhoods where there's just not enough individuals around to keep us safe and keep an eye on things. And so the increase in vacancies, those neighborhoods typically see an increase in illegal dumping. On top of that, there's just too much space to monitor. So there is a environmental protection task force for the St. Louis Police Department, which I have my own feelings about that. But they are unable to monitor the entire city when there's only about 4 people assigned to that. Now, like I said, where is this happening? The 6 neighborhoods with the highest volume of illegal dumping are majority Black neighborhoods, including Dutchtown, which I represent. That's the only South City neighborhood on there, and the rest are all happening in North St. Louis. And the fact that we have had this issue for many, many years with no clear solution is a message to residents in there that their hygiene of their alleyways and streets are not a priority to St. Louis. With that said, Dutchtown South does have a report about the solid waste system in St. Louis City, what's working, what isn't working with specific solutions. We worked with the EPA and again, the Interdisciplinary Environmental Law Clinic. I always know all the words, I just don't know the order. But we worked with them and we're just waiting on the final approval from the EPA and we'll have that out. And that's what I have to say about illegal dumping.
Thanks, Karisa. I'm going to move us into food apartheid, food access. There's a lot of different words we can use to define it, so I want to break down some of the jargon, if you will. But when we talk about food security, a lot of the focus is around the term food desert. And I think it's important to change the way we talk about food and center the conversation around the social inequities that are leading to the lack of food access. A food desert is simply defined as an urban area in which it is difficult to buy affordable or good quality fresh food. With this definition, the implication makes it a problem based on geography, right? You just shouldn't live there. Move closer to the grocery store. What are you doing? But food apartheid is a better alternative because it highlights food systems as a whole and the considering factors like income, race, and geography. So food apartheid focuses on the social and racial inequities that are in play in our food systems by recognizing that there are numerous systems altogether that are making it difficult for people in low-income areas or Black neighborhoods to have access to free, fresh and healthy food within their own neighborhoods. Circumstances leading to food apartheid here in St. Louis varies by neighborhood, by region. However, things like historically discriminatory housing practices and redlining affect what food looks like in St. Louis. And additionally, going back to the illegal dumping, and we have pollutants and what other trash may be dumped, linking into our air, our water, our ground. This has led to St. Louis having pretty unhealthy soil across the area in a lot of polluted environments, which has impacted one's ability to even grow food in their backyard unless they have access to money to be able to bring in new dirt in a growing fence and what have you, or have access to a community garden. But this is all leading to Black St. Louisans being, twice as likely to have limited food access here in St. Louis. Additionally, we want to note that there are fewer grocery stores with access to fresh food in majority Black neighborhoods, as demonstrated on the maps on the screen. And we'll make sure to share these slides so y'all can zoom in on the maps even more. But you can see how different grocery stores are, the region and what access to quality food they have. And even within St. Louis region, depending on where their stores are located, you'll have completely different food and access to food. I personally live in South City, Karisa does too. We know that the Schnucks on South Grand is vastly different from the one less than a mile away on the other side of Tower Grove Park and on Arsenal. Vastly different. Someone should do a sociology report on it. Honestly, it's fascinating.
On just the quality of Schnucks, depending on where you are in St. Louis.
Absolutely. Right. But as we can see in these maps, the same areas that have stores that are more than half a mile away from their homes are the same areas that also have low vehicle accessibility. Compounded on the problem, Louis has a poor metro transit system that prioritizes commercial areas over our residential areas. And grocery shopping here in St. Louis, frankly, requires access to a car or reliable transportation almost every day. And much more than is accessible to Black St. Louisans today. Research is showing that access to healthy foods is associated with a lower risk of obesity and diet-related chronic illnesses, all of back to our public health, right? 38% of African American adults in St. Louis City are obese compared to 27% of our white city residents. Diabetes is also a health risk linked to food apartheid, and Black residents are being diagnosed at a much higher level than our white city residents as well. And this burden of costly treatments for many diseases can be prevented by overhauling our food system in low income and minority neighborhoods. With that, I'm going to move us into another inequity we're seeing in our city, which is home energy burden. So energy burden, it's a little bit of a jargon, is the percentage of your household income that you're spending on utilities. You can see from this graph that more people are spending money on utilities or excuse me, I'm having hiccups, which is a really poor time to have them. We're having Black residents in St. Louis are having to spend more of their paycheck on utilities than their white neighbors here in St. Louis. And let's talk a little bit more about why that is. So this winter, you know, it got really, really cold, and we wanted to make sure we had our heat on. While our heat is on, we're spending quite a bit of money, especially with some of our utilities hiking our prices for an unnecessary pipeline, right? But we want to be able to be comfortable in our own homes, especially when we have to stay home due to the COVID pandemic, right? We want to be able to be comfortable in our own home. But here across the country and in St. Louis specifically, Black and Latino households are, and especially rentals, are facing extreme energy burdens, meaning again, they're having to pay a higher percentage of, they're using a higher percentage of their income to pay for their utilities. And frankly, out of the 48 largest states in the United States, St. Louis actually places 6th in the highest energy burden on Black households. And why is that? That is because St. Louis frankly has poor housing building quality across the city, which is leaving our neighbors living with poor installation, air leaks, and other old or inefficient heating and cooling systems in their buildings, which we know is very expensive to replace. But specifically, landlords in a lot of the tenant issues that Action St. Louis, Dutchtown South, our city defenders run into, landlords are frankly responsible for correcting these issues. And they're not always being held accountable to do so. And therefore, because they're not making these quick fixes, not quick fixes, they can be large fixes, because they're not addressing their own problem. However, the tenants are having to pay for those inefficiencies in their own property they're renting. But low income homeowners do have some options with utility assistance, like the low income home energy assistance program, which is federally funded, and a weatherization assistance program, which would help repair some of those utility fixes in your house, such as sealing and repairing ducts, tuning and repairing heating or cooling units. But however, these programs do not protect all of Black community members and low-income families here in Missouri from the overall crushing energy costs due to income limitations and the needing for more funding. But we need energy to survive, right? We wouldn't be having this conversation without energy. We have to decide, between keeping the electricity on or feeding our family or having to pay for medication. Because of that, I view it as a policy failure by our state and city leaders. But we also need our utilities to step up and say that they are the good neighbors that they act, or to step up and act like the good neighbors they say they are. A lot of folks like to say that in their branding, but instead of turning off people's energy in the middle of a heat wave or a winter storm, like that is still happening across Missouri, we need neighbors to help shift or cover the energy burden to ensure we don't have community members dying from heat stroke or from freezing. And along with a moratorium on evictions, we also have to ensure that people can keep themselves safe in their home and to be able to provide energy to live in. But there's some other things going on in our home that need to be addressed. So Karisa,
So much.
Let's talk about mold.
Talk about mold. Okay, so mold disproportionately impacts Black St. Louisans. As the map shows, all but one of the city's majority Black wards had at least 6 interior mold complaints about the city to the Citizen Service Bureau in 2018. And 70% of the wards with 6 or more interior mold complaints were majority Black. I will add on to anytime we talk about the complaints going to Citizen Service Bureau, which is where a lot of our data comes from. We also need to remember that means that you have to know Citizen Service Bureau exists. I think I lived in St. Louis before I ever heard that phrase. On top of that, you need to know how to get in touch with them. So you need to either have access to the internet, their phone number, or be able to physically go to their offices. And so sometimes when I look at Citizen Service Bureau complaints, I see a high amount of complaints in like my neighborhood, Tower Grove South, where I like to keep up with what's going on. I'll see lots of complaints about trash in our alleyways. And I wonder to myself, is that because there's a huge issue or because we know about Citizen Service Bureau, we have access and time to handle that? So that's just my little Citizen Service Bureau asterisk. Mold, it was the third most common complaint referred to. CSB is what I'll call it, in 2016. It's particularly challenging problem to address because it's expensive to remove and there are no legal standards for mold exposure. Because the high cost of remediating mold, landlords often refuse to do it, and a lawsuit is really the only thing that will force a landlord to do so, and it'll cost them thousands of dollars. So it'll cost the tenant thousands in order to ask the landlord to fix it. Within our tenant rights work at Dutchtown South, it is not an uncommon story for us to hear that somebody moved into a freshly painted apartment, and everything looked really clean and good. And soon they started noticing they had chest issues, and soon they noticed their kid was coughing a lot. And then the mold started blooming through the paint. What often happens is a tenant will leave due to the mold, and the landlord paints over the mold to block the sight and smell of it for the new tenant to lease the space. We see them in closets. We hear about it in bathrooms and spaces. And so it's one of the most heartbreaking things to me within the tenant realm, because there's very little protections that those tenants have. Within the majority of the city's residents living in rental housing, and that is a fact that I always forget about. Majority of the people in St. Louis City rent and do not own. And so they really are at the whim of the property owner for a lot of their physical safety within the home. And over a fifth of the city's population living below the federal poverty level, addressing mold is out of reach for many who are most affected by it. St. Louis has incredibly weak tenant protections, and there is no building code, there is no firm standard for mold. There's nothing built into our occupancy or building codes, so it's hard to hold landlords accountable, and the costs often fall on the tenants. Mold can cause or make worse nasal and sinus congestion, cough, sore throat, chest tightness, breathing difficulties, upper respiratory infections, headaches, and can also trigger asthma attacks. In 2011, in a major 2011 allergy study, St. Louis tied for the 6th worst major city in the US for patients showing sensitization to mold. I'll also add on there that it's not, to me, just a tenant rights issue, it is a workers' rights issue. And that's from a personal place. When I was a server, we were expected to use a restroom that was covered in mold. And we would be told that they would take care of it and then it would come back, take care of it and come back. And then there's a large portion where, at what point is it like financially feasible to take care of this? and whatnot, but it did make it very clear that as employees, we were expected to put our health at risk. And that was an expectation of our work. So mold doesn't just happen in the home, it happens in the workplace, in our public spaces. Mold is just everywhere, as is the other Black Death, lead. I think of a little too much about lead poisoning, especially these days. So the city of St. Louis started prioritizing childhood lead poisoning in the early 1970s. And various programs and funding commitments have come and gone, with this preventable yet devastating problem still persists today. Again, you can see on this map where children are suffering from lead poisoning and where the majority of those children are Black. And again, it's overlaid on top of each other. One of the contributing factors around the city's high lead levels and of childhood lead poisoning is the fact that nearly 90% of the city's homes were built before 1980 and likely contained lead due to the fact that lead paint wasn't banned in use in housing until 1978. However, housing age does not explain the racial disparities of childhood lead poisoning in St. Louis, since several wards in South St. Louis, which have very high percentages of
Yeah,
homes
there pretty much isn't any stock anymore. So I can
sorry, 1980, and our majority white have very low lead poisoning rates compared to wards that are majority Black. For example, even though they have similar percentages of 1980 built home, wards 10, 16, 23, and 24, which are majority white, had less than 2% of the children lead poisoning compared to 10% of children in wards 1, 4, 20, and 21 that are majority Black. Therefore, building age is a factor in childhood lead poisoning. However, factors such as inadequate building maintenance and other unsafe housing conditions likely contribute to lead exposures and disparities in St. Louis as well. Lead poisoning harms predominantly the city's Black children, who are 2.4 times as likely as white children to test positive for lead in their blood, and account for 70% of the children found to suffer from lead poisoning in 2018. I'm trying to remember what the statistic is in my but I believe St. Louis children in general are twice as likely to suffer from lead poisoning than children out in anywhere else in Missouri. As the city's health department stated in its most recent report, some Americans face a triple whammy of increased risk based on poverty, race, and space. The prevalence of lead poisoning in Black children with its lifelong injuries, issues within lead that is not something that goes away. And there's a lot of behavioral and learning issues that really do stem directly from lead poisoning. Evidence dating back to the 1970s has shown that lead poisoning rates are higher in inner cities and low-income minority neighborhoods than in white, affluent suburban neighborhoods. When you look at the government-sponsored suburban development and racial segregation after World War II, that has contributed to lead poisoning by concentrating minorities, families in substandard urban housing. Discriminatory government policies effectively excluded minority families from buying homes in suburban neighborhoods, leaving them trapped in cities where the vicious cycle of deterioration and disinvestment exacerbate lead hazards. There are no safe levels of lead exposure, none. A fact that I cannot believe I have to keep saying to folks. And again, exposure can cause permanent brain damage with the nervous system, difficulty learning and paying attention, slow child's growth and development, These learning disabilities, behavior and emotional problems, aggression, increased school dropout rate, suspensions, delinquency, as well as criminal activities and violence. Children are more likely to get lead poisoning when lead from the household paint gets into household dust. The dust gets in the hands, the toys, the objects. Children put everything in their mouth. And it's a vicious cycle. Because lead poisoning has no obvious symptoms, it does require testing to determine whether a child is suffering from lead poisoning. The city does offer free lead testing, I believe, until the child is 6 or 7. In addition to the house itself that kids live in, the kids are exposed to lead as well through coal ash in the air. Am I saying that right, Ashton, or is it? Yes. Okay. I had a moment where I was like, that's yes. So again, we have Ameren who's putting it into our air. Kids are getting into it. I was at a elementary school that I work with for my job, and they have a sign on a fence that says may have lead, do not touch. I don't know if that is helpful for children who have not learned to read yet. So I don't know how good that is for a kindergarten and first grader. I hope adults are always present. But it's just lead is all over the place and it needs a lot of deliberate money to fix it. So Ashton and I have shared with you a lot of what this report was. And so this report, if you don't remember from the beginning, came out at the end of 2019. I met with a few, Leah that she talked about earlier, from Sierra Club, Catherine from Action St. Louis, somebody who was working at Arch City at the time. And the 4 of us came up with this amazing outreach plan around the report. And then COVID hit us like a truck. And all of a sudden, everything stalled. And so what we did was we hosted a series of evenings. I believe we did four nights and then a symposium to cap it, but it was 4 evenings where we discussed 2 of the issues and talked with folks about what their experience was with these environmental issues. We really wanted to hear not just what was their experience, but what did they wish had been in place when they had a child with an asthma attack. What would have helped them at the hospital beforehand, after, to ensure that they felt empowered to keep their child safe moving forward. In addition to those events, we also, if you read the report and look through it, all of this data that we've said today is in that report, and I think it really highlights things. But what speaks to my heart is the stories in the report. The stories of people who have been impacted by these firsthand over and over again, and who were never believed about it in a lot of cases, where people just said like, oh, it's not this, or it isn't this, or it's not. And then, we come in with this data and we're like, this is what's happening. And it's, it's deliberate. So that was kind of our original plan, was to have these events in person, to be at things, to be going and talking to people in person. When that was not a safe thing for us or for them, we moved it into an online space. Whenever you move things into an online space, we are making decisions that we've made the decision, and that like we're okay with certain people not being able to be there. And I think like Ashton and I are emotionally okay with that, or intellectually okay with that. And so that's why we make plans for the future to engage with folks who may not be able to log on to a Zoom meeting.
Yeah. But also with that, on the same token, we're also sometimes missing the folks who are most impacted by these issues, because frankly, still in this day and age, access to reliant internet access and, just connecting and knowing where to plug in is hard. So in a normal outreach, we'd be going door to door and having a big town hall or what have you about these issues. But COVID, we've had to rearrange some of our community engagement because of COVID. But some of our next steps and what we're doing to keep this conversation going is a lot of different sorts of outreach. What traditionally do, you know, we like to table at festivals, at concerts, canvassing areas with flyers, having large signs and social media. But we realized, again, we've had to pull back on some of, you know, meeting the community where they are because of safety and other issues. But this is a big issue we have continued to grapple with since the release of the report in late 2019. However, there are some steps we are working towards in coalition with a lot of great organizations to address some of these issues. And some of these recommendations that are listed on the screen, and like I said, we'll make sure y'all have access to, are recommendations from Washington University, Interdisciplinary Environmental Law Center, of how we can address some of these environmental racisms and injustices going on here in the city. Some very obvious one is increasing air pollution monitoring so we can know what's going on and hold people accountable. Very the same with our city's waste management services, as things are not being picked up as they should be and we're not knowing why. Additionally, there can be more funding, especially from some of the bills being passed down from Congress, to provide more education and assistance programs through things like the low-income weatherization assistance program. Really, something Karisa and I have been working a lot around also is passing local legislation to mandate that lead testing be happening in our schools, and to make sure that we have specific standards as to where, when, and how testing will be conducted. If y'all only knew the interviews and hurdles Karisa and I have gone to try to figure out how our public schools are testing lead in their water, it'd be ridiculous. But how can we make this more accountable and make sure our kids are staying safe and not drinking poison water? Along with that, something that really needs to be centered is designating mold as a substandard in the building health and safety codes. Because unless that happens, there's no way landlords will be able to be held accountable. And then lastly, especially in the time of a recession, we would love to prioritize and provide incentives for green jobs to keep job creation and economic development happening in St. Louis, and for our neighbors to be involved in a part of that process as well. But we are all working on this, the 4 organizations, plus 40, or we're a part of 40 organizations working together in St. Louis City to move some of these recommendations among a list of so many other fantastic recommendations. But a large part of that is also bringing these recommendations to the community to get their own feedback, as though these are possible legal remedies of how to fix some of the issues we're seeing in our community. We need to make sure that this is actually what the community wants, and this is something that is a true need. So something that Karisa, Catherine, and I have been working on in previous iterations is producing a survey to try to push out to the community to understand where their priorities in terms of these issues are. Back to COVID being an issue, we can't necessarily get all the data we need in a internet-only sort of whole. But it's things we are working and organizing around. But we are working to continue to gather recommendations and policy solutions to then bring to our community for feedback and insight. And then from there, it's people like myself and Karisa to help mobilize and educate folks when they can take action or how they can help their neighbor. But with that, we thank you. There are so many pictures. You can see them all on environmentalracism.scl.org. We have this lovely flow page with links to take action. We also have our contact information on the screen. We're happy to talk to you, talk to other groups about this issue. We're very passionate, both personally and organizationally, in protecting our community, our environment, our people. So with that, I thank you. And I'll leave my screen up for just another moment and then I'll stop sharing.
We do have some questions in the chat. So let me pull those up. Okay, one of them is, does Schnucks offer lesser quality food in the Black neighborhoods because they can't afford better quality?
So I do not know what Schnucks' practices are in their deliberate ways. What I do know is that when I go to the Schnucks on Grand, and it sits like between Grand and Gravois, it is a very different experience, as Ashton said, than the one on Arsenal, or even I used to work in Ladue. That Schnucks is immaculate. I'm going to push back with love about the idea that it's about affording better quality food. It's far more expensive really to, I'll back up a little bit. The costs in the food that is offered in the different Schnucks are fairly comparable. I have seen anecdotal stories of Schnucks putting more, like charging more for apples in a majority Black neighborhood Schnucks than they would in a majority white neighborhood Schnucks. I do not know the context for all of that. That is purely anecdotal evidence. But it is not about who can afford food. It is not about the quality of food that an individual can afford. We are talking about the access point. So there are family dollars, there are family, there's Dollar Trees and whatnot, and they have these like freezer packed food that has a very low nutritional value, but it does have a high filling value. So you can purchase less food, you'll get more full. However, you will not have the full range of nutrients that it takes for our bodies to do what they want to be doing at their best. And that's really all I'm asking for in the world, is that we all have access to the variety of foods so that we can get those variety of nutritions into our bodies.
Another question here is about the illegal dumping. Who's doing it?
I feel like I'm talking a lot.
This is your area though. Do illegal dumping.
Oh gosh, who isn't doing illegal dumping?
That's the real question.
Honestly, we have a lot of cases of people coming in. A lot of the people who get caught doing illegal dumping is repeat offenders. There is the current fine for illegal dumping is about $500. And I will tell you, I had to get a tree hauled out of my backyard that collapsed in my yard. And it was $150 for me, for the person who took it away to process it at the city. So $500 that you might end up paying versus the like $1,000 to actually accurately process your waste. So that's the game they're playing. So it's a lot of construction materials. Tires is a big one. St. Louis City has a system where you, when you purchase new tires, you give them a little like recycling fee, and then they're supposed to use that fee to recycle the tires that come in next. A lot of unscrupulous people pocket the fee and then they dump the tires. I drove by and saw like a huge mountain of tires not that long ago, and I was like, I gotta go back to take photos to send it in. So that's it. There's also the fact that when you don't put your trash into the proper receptacle, you are illegally dumping. And so one of the issues that happens is there's an inadequate amount of dumpsters, or the dumpsters are in poor repair. Somebody goes outside, they see that it's full, someone's already put something on top of it, they put it on the side. That is part of that, like those numbers. I am by no means advocating that we like start fining our neighbors $500 because they didn't like lift a thing and put it in there. I think there's more productive ways to have that conversation. But the contractors who are coming from the county with all of their crap and they're putting it in my neighborhood, yeah, start finding them up.
I have a, oh,
Oh, I have to say, well said. She did it great.
I have a question about landlords getting away with so many things. And I'm just wondering, so who in the city government piece do they report to? I mean, somebody must be over all the landlords in
Nope,
the city. They don't answer to anyone.
they are not a business, they are an investor. So there is not a specific entity within this city government that they
So
are
they
beholden
answer to. So what about in other cities? Because other cities, the landlords don't get by with this much. At least some that I've worked in.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's because Missouri as a whole in St. Louis is our policies for housing tend to favor what landlords want and what they want to be able to reduce to keep the most money in their pocket, not have to provide as much work to their property units. There are other cities across the country, like you're right, where tenants have a lot more protections and
Right.
the landlords have a lot more responsibilities. And one way they have been able to do that is by passing a local tenants bill of rights or other tenant related protections. In Kansas City, there is a group called KC Tenants who is trying to organize and do the exact same thing across the state. This is a huge issue here in St. Louis, which kind of goes into a question I see in the chat about there being a shortage of affordable housing. Is there one?
Yeah.
My understanding is yes, there is. As someone living in St. Louis and knowing a lot of people trying to find houses or rent houses, it's incredibly hard. It keeps going up and up. And especially it's a hard time for people to stay in their houses. We still need an eviction moratorium so people are not being evicted when a lot of people are not able to work still because of the COVID pandemic. Even though our state at the end of 2021 said COVID's over and ended all protections for folks, the state of emergency is over. But that's where we're at. Affordable housing is a huge issue, and that's why groups are organizing.
I just saw there's the affordable housing report card for St. Louis. I'll look it up and put it in the chat. I'd highly recommend looking at that. They just spoke at a thing for Dutchtown South, and I believe the number is 1,600 more affordable units. So that would be units that would not be a housing burden. So not take up more than 30% of a worker's pay for their rent at about 80% of the average income in our city. So there's a lot of jargon when talking about affordable housing. But yes, there's a shortage and it is significant.
Here's one about lead poisoning. It says you speak about lead poisoning in paint. What about the lead in water, especially in the school system? Has this been addressed in your research?
I'll go. So this has not been explicitly done in this report, as in school water with lead pollution. However, Karisa and we are working with a phenomenal group of folks trying to pass this legislation that could limit lead in our school systems across the state and locally. Madeline Middlebrooks works at Great Rivers Environmental Law Center and she's phenomenal and has been really leading the charge on organizing and doing the research to understand how we're testing the lead and what we need to do to accurately correct the lead poisoning in our water systems, which our group advocates a very cost-effective way to do that is to ensure that we have the correct kind of water filters that can actually filter out the pollutants. Because again, there's no safe amount of lead. And there are some of the standards in our countries that there can be up to 10 units of lead in water. And we know that some sinks in St. Louis public schools have seen levels of like 100 plus units of lead, 800 plus units of lead. Large amounts of lead is able to be traced in our water systems, and there is no statewide, federal, any kind of mandate about that. So we're starting local and statewide.
Yeah. And I'll add on to there that we're trying to get specifically the correct kind of water fountains onto there. And the teachers are concerned, the parents are, anyone we speak to about this they care a lot. It's just a matter of limited resources for St. Louis Public School. And so part of our work is not just, hey, here's your solution, but also like, let's get you past that point. So I literally was advocating to the EPA the other day that they need to create grants that go directly to school districts to mitigate lead. So again, like the fences, the water, the paint, like all of it, because they're gorgeous buildings. They're just old and they need to be cared for. So
Here's one about the air quality. Isn't MCU, Metropolitan Congregations United, involved in some of these areas like air quality or the illegal dumping or the food apartheid? And isn't the MCU also advocating or even helping for people or congregations or churches to put up monitors for air quality?
Yes, they are. They're a wonderful partner of ours, also a co-signer of the People's Plan of St. Louis. Actually used to live right across the street from their office, so I know their staff real well. Yeah, they are fierce defendants for air quality. They've been helping, I think, about 6 or 7 different congregations in St. Louis to start monitoring air pollution. I know we're also trying to work with the city of St. Louis to apply for a grant so we can get more air monitors, because we need to be able to monitor what's going on. And they also do a lot of phenomenal work around the school to prison pipeline, making sure folks know their rights and making sure people are registered to vote. But MCU is great.
yeah, I want to stress that by no means is our 4 organizations who worked on this report like the end of environmental work in St. Louis. Ashton has done a fantastic job of coordinating meetups. So we have groups from all over this the metro region. We go out for coffee, we talk about what we're doing, what we need support on, and work together. We send up the bat signal when need be. We just kind of really work together. And so while we're doing our work, it is very much in tandem with countless others who are also doing this work.
Right. And just because our organizations help put this report together, we do not own this report. This report is for our community to be able to advocate for themselves and their own selves. I see Connie's question, who are the key older people who we are working with?
apolitical, so we just have our alder people that answer our calls.
Yeah, I mean, technically we work with all of our older people. We want them all to be a part of it. There are some people who, you know, prioritize environmental issues more than others. I'll say a fierce ally that we have is representative. Oh my gosh, I've been doing state politics too much. Alderman Bill Stevens. He's been really wonderful and even had the environmental racism report as a part of his campaign platform. And we didn't even ask him to do that. He was already ready to run on it. So yeah, however, there are 28 members of the Board of Aldermen. All of them in one way or another are supportive of us. But yeah, they're all great.
Yeah, they especially like, you know, there's a lot of aldermen. The way I phrase it is that our footprint in South St. Louis City is facing almost the same issues that they are facing, the aldermen from the north side are facing. Ours are just turned down. So we have hyper vacancy, we just have less hyper vacancy. We have a lot of illegal dumping, we just have less of it. And so there is a lot of where we meet and we can come together and agree and like work forward. So we, but Dutchtown South doesn't actively do anything with that because we are apolitical or we're nonpartisan.
I don't see
Any other questions?
I don't see any other more in the chat. I don't know if anybody wants to raise their hand and ask a question. I don't see anybody raising their hand to ask a question either. I am very grateful to Karisa and Ashton. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for this wonderful presentation. And it's really, I think, opened our eyes to all the interconnectedness of these problems in the city. And I'm sure in the counties, there's going to be some of these same things too. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Our next FFE event is a film called A Lot in Common. It will be on April 12th. It will be via Zoom, and it's growing community while growing a community garden. So I'm just thinking of all those empty plots that you talked about and how come we couldn't grow or have some community gardens around the city. But as you said, most of the owners are looking for, or most of the government structures are looking for the taxes to be made off those properties. So it's too bad we couldn't grow more community gardens to have that fresh produce access for the people too. So A Lot in Common, the film, April 12th at 7 o'clock, again on Zoom, and you do register through our website. So I thank everybody for participating this evening. We did record this. I will send a link for the recording to everybody, and especially to those people who registered but were not able to get on tonight. So again, Ashton and Karisa, thank you, thank you, thank you. And good night, everybody.
Thank
Good
you
night.
all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.